So nice to meet you. Grab a seat. Hi, I'm Annie Parker. This is Source Code. This is where we get to speak to founders and get the real stories behind their startups. Today we're with Melissa Sassi, and she's going to talk to us all about digital inclusion and how she's been able to build her own startup around that. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm really interested to hear more about you and your story. So let's start with, who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Melissa Sassi, and I'm the CEO and founder of a nonprofit based out of Tunis, Tunisia. It's called Mentor Nations, but I also have kept my job in big tech.
Interesting. So let's start with the startup itself and where the genesis of the idea came from. What drove you or inspired you to become a founder in the first place?
You know, I'm going to tell you a story before I do that, and it'll all come together in a second. So I'm going to tell you a story about the day that Zahra, who was 7, Zahran, who was 5, and Yumna, who was 3, were picked up at school by their father and taken to his home country without their mother's permission. Fast forward 10 years, where Zahra is 17 and Zahran is 15, Yumna is 13. I'm actually the mother of Zahra, Zahran, and Yumna. And that experience, now they're safe, they're healthy, they're normal adjusted kids, but they didn't make it home. And it really kind of got me thinking about, how do you get on from your personal tragedy? How do you get on from something that is any mother's worst nightmare, any person's worst nightmare, mother or father? And how do you transform that into being your superpower? In the beginning, I will say that I didn't do a good job, and I had no superpowers at all. But what this experience gave me is understanding that my kids were able to empower me to be a mother from afar by having access to the internet, access to digital skills, and the ability to combine access to a device and all of those things to enable me to be a mother from afar. And it really got me thinking about not just what digital inclusion means for my kids, but what does digital inclusion mean for their community, for their country, for the continent of Africa, for the region, and for the world. And when I realized that 49% of the world lacked access to the internet, and significant populations of people and women and girls are exponentially more impacted by lacking, digital skills, well, what can I do about that? I started with my daughter's school and started in Tunisia, where we sent 400 laptops to 20 schools. This was funded by a couple of large big tech companies. And it went from that to creating my own company, and we've now taught tens of thousands of kids to code across 12 countries.
That's incredible. What an extraordinary outcome from, let's face it, something, as you just said yourself, a bit of a personal tragedy. Some good came out of that.
Exactly.
And how long has that process taken? So you
5 years, 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
and you're already in 12 countries. So what's the overall big vision that you're driving for? What's the big thing that you would love to go out there and fix?
For me, having access to digital skills and being able to make meaningful use of the internet is what will prepare youth or anyone else for the future of work. I love teaching young people to code, even though I don't code myself and I'm not an engineer. I work with a team of engineers who really help to bring my vision to life, and that's all about, let's get as many people skilled up when it comes to digital skills as we possibly can, so that we're not leaving people behind.
So you mentioned just a couple seconds ago there that you still have your big job, your job in big tech.
Yeah, I think it is a big job.
Well, it is. It absolutely is. So help us understand, because a lot of people may assume out there that to be a founder, you have to fit a certain kind of type. It's got to be a full-time role. It has to be something that you have to be a technical person or other things. But you're proving that model completely wrong by being a founder of a business, not technical, and you still have a day job.
Exactly. I won't lie to you. It's really hard, and I work a lot. I have my full-time job. I will say that all of my activities, whether it's the company that I run on the side, the job that I have, working on my PhD, it's a whole heck of a lot. It's a whole heck of a lot for anyone to handle. But I think that's why there's no I in team, and that's why you have to have a big team of people that you can collaborate with, who are actually going out and getting stuff done. But I don't believe that we need to choose anymore between being an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. It's not an or. It's possible to be an and be all of these things at the same time. So when I go out and do talks or workshops, I like to do things from an academic perspective where I leverage what I've learned in my PhD program, or what I learned in big tech, or what I've learned by running my nonprofit. And it kind of helps think about things both from a theoretical standpoint, but also a practical standpoint.
So you see all of those things as being sort of additive rather than distracting?
I do. Now, it does take a lot to manage all of those things at the same time. I personally don't take a salary for for my side shimmy. I keep all of the funding that comes into my nonprofit or my co-working space in country. And I do that to really empower young people. My organization is all youth-led and youth-run. No one is over the age of 31 except for me. And that's what I find part of the magic is, really empowering young people to transform their lives through technology, but practical experiences. And when I talk about, teaching young people to code, it's really a whole heck of a lot more than that. Anytime we run any of our camps, we start off with, let's look at the business problem or the societal problem. It could be using the UN Sustainable Development Goals and saying, define a problem, now back that up with data, now who is your audience? And then we take that and they build a technical solution and they launch a business. So they write a business plan, they pitch it, we have companies come in a demo day. And so they're learning public speaking, collaboration, problem solving, all kinds of stuff that's much, much bigger than just, hey, go out and build something. Being an engineer or being a technologist is not going out and building something for the sake of building it. It's building something to solve a problem. And so that's a big piece of what we do.
So you do wear a ton of different hats. How on earth do you keep all of that going? Even when times get hard, because I'm going to assume as well that not everything runs perfectly across all of those different kind of areas of your work and your personal life. So how do you keep going?
One of the things that I learned about myself recently is, I heard about other people with ADHD, and I thought it was a little bit of a joke to find out that, wow, all of a sudden you're an adult and you find out that you have ADHD. And I realized my doctor put me through this test, but I realized that, wait a second, that's me. And the reason why I jump from project to project and idea to idea is maybe there's some blessing in what's going on in my brain, or maybe a little bit of a curse, I don't know, maybe a combination of both. But I think part of what makes me me, and part of what makes me, I guess, neurodiverse, is that I have all these ideas in my mind. Where I struggle is making sure that I take those big ideas and I actually make them happen. And this is where I think it's really important for us to identify who is our squad, who is our team of people who can help us bring things to life. Whether it's my job in tech, whether it's my nonprofit, I have a squad. And I know when to talk to my colleagues to say, you know what, this is not my strength. Can you help me?
Do these folks all do different things for you? Do they each have different roles?
Absolutely. So, if I think about my nonprofit, for example, the young people are creating, so Via, Farah, Zied, they're the ones who are creating our, pitch decks, for example. They're the ones who are, talking to the American Embassy or the U.S. Department of State. So we've gotten funding from Google, from HP, from SAP, as well as the U.S. Department of State. And they're the ones leading those activities. I serve as a mentor for them. It wasn't always like that, and I was much more involved previously, but I think it's important for me to share my skills forward with them, and also know when I'm gonna get my skis too far out in front of me where I'm out of my swim lane. I think because I'm working with all young people, sometimes they're learning from these experiences as they go. They're getting better at writing proposals. The last, opportunity that we got, the donor actually came to us and said, if we were to give you $200,000, what would you do with it? And for me, I thought, wow, we didn't have to go and apply for a grant. The donor came to us, not anybody else. And so for me, that really shows that we've been working very hard to get where we are. and learned from some of the experiences where maybe some of those proposals didn't go so well, or maybe we didn't say all the right things. And that's okay.
And also, you must have done something that donor saw that was really impactful. So what are some of the tangible examples of things that your nonprofit has achieved?
So I think the biggest thing has been, we have a flagship camp that we run in Tunisia where we have taken in young people from across the country, and they come in for a 30-day boot camp. And this is in a country where it's not very common for you to go and stay the night in the capital, especially if you're a young girl living on the Libyan border, living on the Algerian border, living in the Sahara, where the family might be more conservative. We have 50% girls and 50% boys in our programs, whether that's leadership, mentors, or participants. And as part of that, we brought these young people who had never coded before. We taught them how to build a mobile application and an IoT device. And they came out of that knowing how to build a business, knowing how to build this technology solution, and knowing how to become economically empowered from that. And at the end of every single camp that we have, the parents and the young people, they all cry. I cried. So imagine, you've got your donor sitting there and everybody's crying because they don't want to go home.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
That's pretty powerful. You know that you've done a good job. And looking at some of the solutions they've created, I look back on my youth and I think, wow, I can't imagine if you had even thought about something like that when I was 16 or 17 or 14 or whatever.
That's incredible. So before we got on camera, you talked a little bit about imposter syndrome, and I know this is something that you speak a lot about publicly as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what imposter syndrome is for you?
I'll give you an example. I was at a UN event, and I got asked to speak on the main stage, and it was a big event with IT ministers, and I said, well, who else is on the panel? And they told me this world-winning, this award-winning economist and this large organization that we've all heard of, the president of this organization, an IT minister, and the CIO of this large mobile operator, and me. And I'm like, okay, but what are we going to talk about? And they said, we're going to talk about disruptive technology in the next 5 years. It's okay, all right, I can talk about that, but I'm not an economist, and I'm not going to talk about stats of this, that, and the other. I'm going to tell stories. And I'm going to talk about real people who've been impacted by not having access to these things.
Right.
The role of skills, the role of entrepreneurship, the role of having youth and women and underserved communities or underrepresented communities at the table. Everyone sat up, and when it came time to present, they rattled off their stats, and I felt my imposter syndrome, kicking in again. And I decided, let me go back to what I know, and that's telling a real story about a real person. And I decided I would talk about my daughter. And I said, one day my daughter, came to me and she said, Mommy, I'm learning Microsoft. Wow, what do you mean you're learning Microsoft? That's her accent.
Yeah.
And really she was learning Word in front of the classroom, one computer, everybody was sharing. It's great for us to sit up here and talk about 5G. It's great for us to rattle off stats about the amazing things that 5G is going to bring to the world. 49% of the world doesn't have access to the internet. Significant populations of people don't have access to digital skills. It's great for us to help make the developed world more developed. What are we doing to make Zahra part of the digital economy?
Yeah.
And all of the Zahras from around the world. And I had an IT minister, and I can't remember which country he was from, but a country here on the continent in Africa. And he grabbed me and he said, thank you for bringing real life and emotion to the conversation and for talking about Zahra.
Made it real.
He's like, I get so tired of us talking about what's coming next and the future of technology and the role that AI and machine learning and cloud computing is going to play, which is all important. It's very, very important. But when we've got people who don't have the basic skills of keeping themselves safe online, how do we truly transition people from being consumers of technology into creators, makers, and doers empowered by technology?
Fantastic, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think we cannot expect for this to all change if we don't fundamentally shift some of those specific things. Final question, I always ask this in these interviews.
Yes.
I'd love to hear what advice you might have for other founders out there who may be struggling or finding it a little hard or just having a rough day. What advice do you have for founders out there?
I think a couple of things. I find it helpful to figure out who really is in your squad. I often find that I talk to people who might discourage me, and I find that discourages me.
Well,
of course, they're discouraging people. I try to figure out, who are the people who empower me? Who are the people who are doing well with their, startup or with their entrepreneurship activities? And I think that's a big thing. One of the things that you talked about is imposter syndrome. I think imposter syndrome is something that's very real to me, and it's not something that just impacts women, it impacts all of us. I think that it's figuring out through tools and solutions that enable you to remind yourself that you belong at that table. And we hear a lot about, people who raise this amount of money really quickly and there you go. But there are many more stories of people who struggle day in and day out. And it's exponentially more difficult for female founders. I think as a female founder, I think it's important for me to also, talk with other female founders and understand their perspectives, what's worked well for them, how do I engage with them. But I think on top of that, I think it's also important to remember that it takes time and not everybody is going to be successful right away, and maybe you will fail. But as long as you learn from it, it's okay. And so what if it's not your full-time job? You can do both. It takes a lot of time and it's very hard to do both. But I think we've reached this time where we shouldn't have to choose between a job and being an entrepreneur. We can be an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur at the same time, as long as we're not creating any conflicts of interest on either side and still being ethical and moral in our work.
Melissa, thank you so much. Your advice and your story is incredibly empowering and inspiring, hopefully, for everybody who watches. Really, genuinely, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching, everybody. My name's Annie Parker, and this has been Source Code.